When I set out to start this fund, no one else wanted to do this. I remember the laughs I used to get because, again, there wasn't any business in space to speak of. Today, space-focused funds are popping up left and right. There are dozens of them. And I think, especially in 2021, there was a lot of capital that went to not great ideas. I'm looking at satellite companies that are raising huge amounts of money at crazy valuations, and they've launched one satellite that didn't work.
Hey, SpaceWatchers, this is Space Café Radio, your channel about trends, awesome events, and interesting people in the space sector. At the geo-in Symposium 2025 in St. Louis, we spoke with Chad Anderson. Chad is the founder and managing partner of Space Capital, a New York-based venture capital firm specialized in space-based technologies. And since its inception in 2017, Space Capital has managed over $100 million in assets, investing in areas like GPS, geospatial intelligence, and satellite communications. Our senior editor and advisor Laura Todd discussed with him the challenges and opportunities of the space economy, his perspective of the space ecosystem of the future. And with that, over to you, Laura.
Welcome, Chad, to Space Cafe Podcast. It's my pleasure to have you here. So just for everyone, again, to reinforce, you are an author. You have just published a new book, The Space Economy, as well as, of course, being a very professional podcaster on Space Capital Podcast. And we are here in St. Louis for geo-in 2025. So welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
As we are in St. Louis for geo-int, what are your first impressions and thoughts of what you've seen so far?
It's a great event for us. We are a venture capital firm that is investing in space companies. And a lot of times people think that is the Apollo moon landings and the International Space Station. But the real value in the space economy is in the satellites and in the data that's coming off of those satellites. GPS, geospatial intelligence, satellite communications. These are the three key areas in which we are investing and where we think the greatest value is. And so geospatial is a massive opportunity for us. I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but GPS provided a playbook for how space-based technologies create a platform for innovation on a global scale. And geospatial is following a very similar path. We're just a few years earlier there. So we're now witnessing the growth in geospatial. We're dealing with massive data sets that we are now able to digest them and unlock the value in this data using AI tools and AI systems. So it's a really exciting time to be investing in these companies. And to be here, we gave a presentation yesterday talking to a lot of folks in this particular audience that are focused on geospatial, building geospatial businesses and tools, serving government customers and commercial customers as well. But to be interacting with these folks, a lot of which we've invested in a lot of these companies already, but there's a lot more out there that we're looking forward to meeting. So it's been a really good event for us.
Which I'm happy to hear about. But I'm going to take some of the things you've said there because I've had the privilege of working in a large European company. So you've got all these different languages and cultures. And we throw out words like people really understand them. And you've said a couple of words or phrases there, such as the space economy, geospatial, it's that geo-intelligence. It's the whole thing we're here for. Could we simplify and break that down? What does that mean for you, the space economy? Because it's also combined with what we hear for lunar economy. And people are throwing these words out, I feel, without truly understanding what they're meaning. So I'd love to hear your take on it, being an expert.
Yeah, sure. So we've been investing in this category for a long time, basically since SpaceX came online and launched their first customer. We have been investing in this category. And I can tell you, back then, there was very few companies to invest in. There was even less investor interest in investing in space companies. Back then, space was NASA and sci-fi, and that was it, right? To come and try and set up a fund to invest in this category, it was a big hill to climb. To convince people of the opportunity that we were seeing with SpaceX coming online, removing the barriers to entry and enabling entrepreneurship and innovation and capital to flow into this category for the first time, to help other people see what we were seeing, we did a lot of research, and we used that research to go out and have conversations with people and help them understand not just the opportunity, but also the risks, and that the risks were manageable, and basically try to put some context around things. There's a lot more interest in this category now, quite a bit more. Research is still a core part of our culture as Space Capital, and so we've written quite a bit and published quite a bit. Our seminal thesis paper, the GPS Playbook, basically says that GPS, how did it go from being a niche military government capability to being ubiquitous this in our everyday lives as consumers and enterprise. It's literally everywhere. Everyone uses it all the time. Like, how did that happen? It's generated trillions of dollars in economic value, some of the largest venture outcomes that we've ever seen. How did that happen? So we studied GPS. We looked at the history of GPS, how those satellites were built and launched by the government for the government and off limits to anyone else by design, until Trimble came along and built a commercial GPS receiver to harness that signal and made it available to the tech community, who then built software applications for end users on top of this. And the applications, the location-based services, is where a lot of the value accrued. Again, trillions of dollars in economic value, according to the U.S. Commerce Department, who has also written analysis on this. So we look at GPS and we say, okay, so that helped us come up with a framework for the infrastructure, the satellites in orbit, the distribution, the GPS receivers, and the applications. This framework has been really helpful in understanding other areas within satellites, such as geospatial intelligence. SpaceX removed the barriers to entry. We have a multitude of new sensors being launched. We have an unprecedented amount of data coming from orbit, and that was really still inaccessible to folks because it was a very verticalized solution for a very sophisticated government customer. You had to have a whole team of specialist people to be able to access that data and leverage it. So now we've got tooling that's coming in that's helping to abstract away that complexity in the same way that GPS receivers did. Companies like SkyWatch are aggregating data from all the different providers, structuring it, making it easily accessible through an API, which means that non-traditional customers are now starting to tap into this API. Everyone knows how APIs work. Everyone has an API call. And then that is fueling the growth of their applications. And then also, we haven't even talked about satellite communications, which is a big area of opportunity. So that's satellites, right? The space economy, the reason why we say the word space economy, not space industry, is because it's much bigger than that. It's a collection of industries. You've got launch. That is an industry in its own right. It makes up probably 9% of what's going on. Satellites makes up 90% of what's happening. And then you've got 1% that is lunar transportation, manufacturing things in orbit. These types of like future nascent markets make up like 1% of what's going on. So the space economy, the book, is actually a set of frameworks and ways of thinking about things to basically understand the breadth of the opportunity set, not just across the different industries within the space economy, but also the different technology layers that help you get out of this thinking that space is just the satellites in orbit. It's not. The satellites are important, but what's more important is, why are you launching them in the first place? And these are two totally different crowds. Like, you go to a space conference and you see the people who build the satellites. They don't know much about the customers who's actually buying them outside of the government, right? Who's been buying it. The customers are somewhere else. The customers are at construction conferences, are at agriculture conferences and things like that. Like, they're out doing their job and they're just looking for better tools, right? So anyway, the space economy is this set of frameworks that's supposed to help you comprehend, understand the entirety of the opportunity.
I'm not going to lie to you. If that's not a reason to buy your book, I don't know what is, because that was a fabulous description of what the space economy looks like. So thank you very much for that. What's interesting for me, though, is coming back again, and we'll take the GPS example. You talk to people because it's, what's the point of space and why are we launching things? Because why aren't we solving climate crisis on the Earth? Why are we wasting money to send people into space? And then often it's trotted out this example of, without space, you wouldn't have GPS. And there is this lack of understanding of what you've rightly pointed out, the trillions of dollars that have been generated because of GPS as an enabler. So I'm curious in terms of, you've said that you do investment in startups, you're looking at those, what I like to call Lego bricks, or building the different elements that come together to deliver value to a user. But there is a huge investment community out there that doesn't understand the value of that. So how do we transform that message or get that message out to them, this value in terms of the space economy in the short term? And you touched on that 1% for the longer term. So what are your thoughts on that?
Getting out there, more and more people are paying attention. It is less difficult to raise investment in this category as a fund investing here, as our portfolio companies. There's a lot more investors who are interested in this category than there was 10 years ago, for sure, even 5 years ago. So I think we're doing a lot of that hard work. A lot of it is the research and publishing the research and having these conversations with folks. But it's also becoming undeniable. SpaceX is the most valuable private company in the world, and it's a leading company in the space economy. There's also just this sort of lack of understanding. For example, Trimble is one of the most important, most established space companies in the world. most people don't give it credit for being a space company. They are literally founded on, like, they license IP from HP to build GPS receivers. They are at the very heart of, like, everything that they do is bringing that signal out to the different industries in transportation, agriculture. They invented precision agriculture, construction, basically the built world. So the challenge with it is that it operates in the background, so it's easy to take for granted. It's GPS in particular, right? The satellites were funded by the government. People think it's free. You pay for your GPS receivers in one way or another, right? But again, it's part of your packaged phone, whatever. Like, you're not consciously paying for a GPS receiver itself. But that's a lot of the value in GPS, is that it operates in the background. And that's why we call these space technologies the invisible backbone of the world's largest industries, because GPS powers the modern global economy. The timing element of GPS enables our financial markets. Without them, you could not trade internationally. It doesn't work without the timing element. GPS is going through a sort of similar transformation, where you used to have companies that were space companies, Earth observation, geospatial companies, and like you were trying to sell your wares to a customer. But what's happening in geospatial is actually we're going to a place where, again, the customers are closer to the end market. Like they understand, like they work with the farmers, they work with the construction companies, whatever, the mining companies. They're not talking to satellite people, nor do they want to or have to deal with any of that. With SkyWatch aggregating all of that data, abstracting away the complexity, making it so you don't have to go out and survey the landscape, figure out who does what, buy the right data at the right time from the right company, that like if it happens to be at night, or it happens like there happens to be clouds, or there happens to be whatever, you can just go tap into that API and you get whatever data it is to answer your question. In GPS, when you're like trying to get somewhere, you don't have to understand which satellites you need to connect to be able to get the answer, right? So geospatial companies are now, for example, an insurance company, right? An underwriter is going to go walk into their whatever insurance company intranet. They're going to log in, and it's going to be the same interface that they always see every single day, but the information is going to be piped in, the geospatial data, the updated base maps, the digital information layered on top of it that is timely and relevant, that allows them to do their job better. It's going to happen. And they're not going to give Earth observation satellites credit for doing that, right? It's just going to make business better, more effective. And there's an infinite number of use cases out there. When building the GPS satellites, no one could have imagined all the ways in which it's being used. The same sort of thing is happening in geospatial right now.
And if I may, just one of my favorites is in particular getting food delivered, even if it's just like 10 minutes down the road from you.
Favorites too.
But this is also what's been interesting with this GeoInt conference that I've seen so far with the discussions, where there's been a slower realization, I would say, because we're talking about a key enabler, and people have a difficulty between what are enablers and then what the actual applications on top of that, the actual features that someone can use. And I'm starting to see that understanding, especially in the GeoInt community. And in particular, you mentioned the government, they paid for the GPS satellites, the defense elements. Are we seeing then a real change for people to understand we have enabling technologies? How do we then optimize the use of commercial companies or smaller companies and startups, the companies of which you're working with, to take benefit or advantage of the features they're able to build on top of that, and to make it more accessible for that reason?
I think that our framework is a great place to start. So you can start to understand who sits in the infrastructure bucket, who sits in the distribution bucket, and who sits in the applications bucket. Each one of these types of companies is vastly different, very different sort of business models, unit economics, challenges, opportunities. So the framework is really valuable in getting your head around who's doing what. And then from there, one of the ways in which we have been really successful is in translating between the infrastructure and the applications, right? Like I said, these are like oil and water. These communities don't mix, right? I can't tell you, I went to space conferences for years. I've been doing this for over a decade. In the early days, it was like the same thing. There was a panel of Earth observation companies, and they would all say, the value is in the applications of this data. And they'd be like, okay, great. What are those applications? And then everyone would like blankly stare at each other and be like, car counting? Oh, there's this really cool thing where you can like look at the tops of silos, grain silos, and see, or oil and gas, and see how much is inside. And they're fundamentally different. Like, they don't think the same way, right? Again, a lot of the success that we found is translating between those two. So we are going out and going to those applications conferences and having conversations with the people who are actually building the solutions, and then helping them understand how you can solve that better. And it's not complicated. Again, you don't need to know orbital mechanics or who does what. Like, none of that is important. What's important is you have a problem you're trying to solve. Your job is difficult in some way, and we can make it easier, better, cheaper, faster Full stop.
An excellent full stop. And I thank you for your service for doing that, because it's one of the frustrations I've always seen. I'm curious then, because you say people are starting to understand it better, even for the investment community. I think it could be improved slightly. You're very open, forward thinking on this. You've been doing it for 10 years. There's a lot of money out there that could be better invested, but it is more efficient, I find, in the US. There's more of an awareness, and maybe it's with the history and culture. I'm from Europe, and there was even an interview, I can't remember when it was exactly, but someone saying, a senior position, there's no market for space, so we're not going to do more than a certain number of launches per year. And we talk about SpaceX in terms of accessibility, but Starship will be a huge game changer. And there are still people, it seems to be, in denial about that. So how do we bring on board the rest of the world to understand that? And we've heard some great conversation topics again today about different countries bringing in their capabilities to build that bigger picture, and not everyone reinventing the wheel, duplicating what already exists. So how do we improve that message for outside of the US?
Yeah. So I went to graduate school in England and stayed there for a couple of years and helped set up an innovation center that was focused on growing the space sector in the country, and then was on the board there for 10 years. So I have some experience with this. I think that there's several factors that contribute to a country's ability to participate. One is technical experience, heritage, like having engineers who have actually built things that have flown and worked. A government that is interested and willing and motivated to support innovation in a way that doesn't stifle it. And then the third is a lot of robust and functioning venture capital ecosystem. So lots of countries have one or two of the first things. The third thing is the thing that I think that America really has that other countries do not. And that matters. The ability to take risk, and pretty outsized risk, to invest in things that could work. Like, the odds are against most of these companies. They don't make sense. They don't make sense as a one-off, but they make sense as, like, for example, a category. You're investing in a category, and not all of them are going to work out, but some of them will. And if they work out, then they pay off big, right? That is something that makes the United States unique. And I would say that it's not all fun and games. We've had challenges with... The challenge that we have is that this market, space as a category, is very exciting. What you get is a whole lot of, like, people who grew up on sci-fi who are, like, space enthusiasts that don't understand anything about the business, right? You also get people who are maybe business savvy that see a great marketing opportunity but don't understand anything about the technology. In both cases, I might add, neither one of these people know anything about the technology. But because there's a lot more participation, we're seeing, again, when I set out to start this fund, no one else wanted to do this. I remember the laughs I used to get because, again, like, there wasn't any business in space to speak of. Today, space-focused funds are popping up left and right. There are dozens of them. And I think, especially in 2021, there was a lot of capital that went to not great ideas. I'm looking at satellite companies that are raising huge amounts of money at crazy valuations, and they've launched one satellite that didn't work. They've launched two satellites that didn't work, 3, 4. Very smart people underestimate what it takes to make a satellite that works. And there's very few companies that can actually do this. And so you've got a lot of enthusiasm and not a lot of sense checking going on, which is also dangerous. We've had companies go public, the majority of which failed spectacularly. A couple of great companies came out of that. The IPO window is opening up again. We've got companies that are going out that barely have hit the revenue threshold that will even constitute an IPO, and they're losing money hand over fist, and they're showing no growth. So it's not gone away. There's a lot more of it happening, and there will be some fallout. And for those of us that are in it for the long haul, we're just trudging along and trying to continue to, like, share the message and help people understand, again, what we've been doing from the very beginning, the real risks and opportunities, bringing a lens that understands the technology and the difficulties and the risks and the opportunities, and then on the market side as well. But yeah, I mean, that's a challenge, even in a market like the US, where, a lot of things are going right. We've still got some things to work out.
We're both happily mentors in Creative Destruction Lab Space Tree. And so we get the opportunity to see all these fantastic new companies coming through. They've got different ideas. They're looking at different areas of space based on what you've just mentioned and the difficulties and challenges. And also coming back to that whole Lego brick mentality of we don't need everyone to be doing the same red brick that's like the 4 little top bits. We need the variety to be able to build something of use, like a Millennium Falcon, if we want to talk about people that love space and sci-fi. What for you then is the most exciting areas you're seeing in terms of startups that you go, this is where we need to be investing? This is a message we should be sending out to people that potentially want to invest?
Yeah, it comes back to the frameworks in the beginning, right? Launch is very exciting. Everyone loves smoke and fire. That is a really difficult business. It's really difficult to make it work technically. And we've seen that because I don't know how many, 100, 150 companies have convinced other people to give them money, right? So they have raised external capital. There are 2 companies, commercially like venture-backed rocket companies that are launching, SpaceX and Rocket Lab. That's it, over a 20-year period, at least operationally. We've got a couple that are starting to come online now. But even if you can make it work technically, it is even harder to make money, which is why every single launch company, as soon as they make it to orbit, the first thing they do is start to get into like satellites, satellite manufacturing, satellite services, other things that make more money. Also, you've got what we call emerging industries. And this is, again, lunar transportation, manufacturing in orbit, commercial space stations, that sort of thing. 1% of what's going on. So if you don't want to spend all of your time, it's easy to get caught up here. And actually, a lot of those funds that I was mentioning that came about in the last few years that thought that this was a great marketing opportunity, they came in and they invested all their capital in these emerging areas. So that's a really difficult way to make money because this is like risk squared or cubed. Like some of these bets are interesting and we are opportunistically putting some money to work, but it's like you're investing in a startup that their whole business model is, will this other startup business model work? And sometimes it's even like another layer deep. So it's really risky stuff and it could pay off. And it's interesting. Like I said, we're opportunistically looking there. But I'd say for us, the biggest areas of opportunity right now are probably at the intersection of geospatial and AI. Again, there's just so much happening here. It's, I don't know, GPS in the 2000s or something like that, like right after it was integrated. I liken SkyWatch, the portfolio company I mentioned earlier. They just did a partnership with Esri, whereby SkyWatch is providing all of the Earth observation content through the content store to Esri's 680,000 customer organizations, which represents millions of users. This is like the iPhone moment. This is when Steve Jobs put GPS into the iPhone 3G, right? So that's where we are in geospatial and why we're so excited about it. But then in addition to that, you've also got, again, these massive data sets and also these AI tools and systems that are coming online that are allowing us to digest all that information and make sense of it all and drive useful insights. So that's a massive area of opportunity. Again, that's one of the main reasons why we're here. There's also, we see a lot of opportunity in space traffic management, for example. We've got all these satellites going up. Space is a big place, but at the same time, there's junkyard orbits. There's ones where, a lot of junk has accumulated over the years and they're not usable. Also, people are all vying for the same orbits, particularly if you're like a remote sensing Earth observation satellite, you want to be really close to the Earth. Those are getting crowded. We've gone from a few hundred satellites in orbit for decades to now 10,000 satellites today, more. We've got tens of thousands more satellites coming online, right? This is super exponential growth. How do we manage all of that? We've made some bets here. We invested in Leo Labs early on, which is like the first step is to understand where things are. So they built a network of ground-based radars to track objects in orbit. Okay, now we have a much better handle on where things are. The next piece is understanding, having companies coordinate amongst themselves to be able to make sure that they stay clear of each other and that the orbits stay safe for operation. Satellites today do not, they're all very protective of their GPS, like where my satellites are and what we're planning on doing. Turns out if you actually share that GPS, so we've invested in another company called Kahan Space, where if you share your information with them, where you are and where you're going, they will share with you other operators, right? And so then you can get away from emails, which is the way it was done before, right? If you get an alert that says, oh, your satellite might hit another satellite, and you're like, okay, look it up and find it, and then you have to call them. Like, that's how it worked. It's just so crazy. So anyway, we're getting to a point now where can we apply some of these software tools to do more machine-to-machine stuff, make our orbits safer for operations. It's very similar to airlines. When you got airlines that go east and west, and they fly with these 10,000-foot buffers in between them, you're always going at 40,000 or 30,000, right? And the reason you do that is because connectivity is poor out there. So you have these massive buffers. If you have better connectivity and you have better sensors in place and better data analytics, you can fly much closer together. You can make much better use of the space. It's the same thing in orbit.
I would just say to you, my sister is afraid of flying, so seeing a plane pass so close, I think she wouldn't appreciate that. So the buffer should stay, I think. But no, I totally understand what you're saying with regards to that. And And again, this is something that we heard a lot from what we're seeing. And what I've appreciated also, and there were several panels today and talks talking about how do we get the right competencies and skills that are able to take advantage of that. So not just people that know how to build the big rockets and have the fire and the flames and the big noise and controlled explosion, essentially. So how have you've talked about you go to all these different types of conferences. It's still very focused on space people. Where do we start to see then this combination of the application environment and bringing those in a way that, again, space people can talk to the end user in a way that's helpful?
Yeah, it's got to be, you got to come at this from a bunch of different angles. Again, the SkyWatch integration with Esri, I can't tell you how game-changing that's going to be. It's really an access play. Like, how do you get access to the customers? And you've got 680,000 plus customer organizations that already are using ArcGIS. And so now you're just piping the data in. That's a huge win and a huge step. If you talk to space people, I think there's a lot of people who actually still argue with our frameworks and the way that we see things. There was this sort of like natural aversion to it because they're like space people. They're going to their space conferences and like Uber's not there. What do you mean? Uber's not a space company, right? But there's this fun thought exercise that if you were to go into Uber headquarters and just walk into their cafeteria or their canteen, if you will, and like just go and talk to random people and say, hey, do you work for a space company? There'd be a whole lot of people who say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a software developer and this is a rideshare company. I don't know what you're talking about. But there would be a large number of people, probably like 40% of employees who are, yes, all day I think about the GPS signal getting lost in urban canyons where our biggest density of customers is. The signal's bouncing off. The blue dot is showing me 2 blocks from where I need to be. People are canceling rides or whatever, and it's a huge problem for us. So I spend all my day thinking about GPS. And if you go on Uber's website, they have all kinds of documentation where they're doing all kinds of research and development in this area. That's the test for me. And so it's just this combination of abstracting away the complexity, making it really easy to access valuable information and insights. And the people who are busy doing their jobs will actually try out the whatever it is that you're selling, whether it's geospatial data, better positioning data, better connectivity. And you do it in a way where you meet the customer where they are. Because the customer's not going to go, oh, super cool satellite system. Let me go and buy a terminal they're not going to. They've already got their equipment. They've already got their way of doing things. You need to find a way to pipe yourself into what they're doing. And again, that comes from abstracting away the complexity, building awareness through distribution partners and channels, using new tools that otherwise don't exist. There's an incredible synthetic AI company in our portfolio who is leading the charge here. The world's run out of data to train AI. And in a lot of cases, the data doesn't exist. There's privacy issues. There's all kinds of reasons why you can't use real data. Real data is insufficient. So there's also new technologies that didn't exist before, like what Rendered is building in their synthetic data platform that's allowing us to make better use of satellite imagery, but also a multitude of other data as well, like X-rays at airports and basically anything computer vision related. So a lot of applicability outside of just satellite data as well.
So at Space Symposium, there was an excellent panel, NATO panel. And I remember it very distinctly because the phrase that came out is, we need to normalize space. And you talk about the whole GPSing and Uber and delivery and stuff. But the fact is, they were like, I'm looking at a map and how do I use a map? Not. And I love the fact that 40% are now saying, I work in the space economy. But for the most part, people hear space. And again, they think of a rocket and sci-fi or whatever, and don't equate that with, I can use this data, as you've just talked about, or these capabilities to do something cool. Because no one talks about, oh no, I work in a terrestrial business.
Yes.
How do we overcome this challenge? And I speak this again, coming back to as someone that grew up in Star Wars and Star Trek and whatnot, to the normies that hear space and just immediately think of science fiction. So how do we overcome that challenge?
Probably the most effective way to do that is to read the Space Economy book.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's really like the idea is to help get that message across and to help people understand. Again, there's still some folks in the space community who are like holding out and digging their toes in and will not accept the reality of they want to stay in their silo. Like I said, our frameworks were contrarian when we first came up with them and started publishing them, but slowly over time, founders, investors, large corporations are all coming on board and adopting these frameworks. McKinsey and the World Economic Forum just put out a report talking about in the next 10 years, there's going to be a $2 trillion space economy. I think their numbers are off. I think we're already there if you count, everything that's happening. But they use the exact same frameworks. They call them backbone and reach, which is basically infrastructure and applications. And they say that all the value is going to accrue in their reach applications, which is like Ubers and rideshare delivery, all of these sort of location-based services. It's happening. It's a big ship. And so it takes a while to turn, but it's turning. And once it starts turning, that's the thing about big ships. Once it starts turning, it's really hard to stop it. So
I'm happy to hear that. I'm going to be a little bit provocative on this because as much as I love all the benefits we have from geospatial and data and whatnot and getting my Uber ride to the airport, for me, what's very interesting is like going further than that. And I mentioned it earlier in terms of the lunar economy, and you talked about it's the 1% right now, but the in-space manufacturing on these on-orbit services. But yet again, we see a lot of startups and entrepreneurs and people with crazy ideas that are trying to build that. So how do you see that in terms of it starting to shift in that percentage and increasing?
Well, there's a lot happening there, no doubt. And the challenge is understanding where the real opportunity is and understanding where technology is going. There's leapfrog technologies that are coming online that are going to accelerate growth in existing markets and make a lot of existing infrastructure and a lot of investment obsolete. We're seeing this right now with SpaceX in a bunch of different ways, Starship being chief among them. Starship comes online, right? You've got all this money that's gone into commercial space stations. They're being built in the same way that the International Space Station was, just on a smaller scale and with venture dollars. The International Space Station costs $150 billion to build and $3-4 billion a year in operations, right? That does not make sense as a venture-backed business. Also, with a permanent station, you've set it up for one particular customer. Not everyone wants that. Not everyone wants to go, even if you set it up as a luxury hotel, I'll go and ask them where their market is. Oh, it's manufacturing and it's this and that. It's what are you going to do? You have to send up crews to switch out the entire interior, or what are you going to do? With Starship, it's as big as a lot of these space stations anyway, and it's got its own up mass and down mass. Like you launch with it and you come back with it. You can set it up however you want before you launch. You can cater that experience to whoever the customer is, and you don't have to pay a middleman however many $100 million to go up and come back. Calls into question, do we even need permanent stations? I think we probably will have some as prestige or sovereign national reasons, like non-economic reasons, we might have some. In-orbit transportation. You've got, if Starship comes online, it's going to be this like freight train that takes you up to low Earth orbit and drops you off. A whole bunch of satellites being dropped off at the same station. That's not necessarily where they want to be or where they want to go. We've invested in a company called Impulse Space that will take you to geostationary orbit in a day. They will take you to whatever orbital inclination or anywhere else in the solar system. That seems pretty important. That doesn't seem like something that SpaceX is going to do. So maybe that's interesting. I don't know. Lunar's all over the place. I think we've got a situation where we're getting a little bit out in front of our skis, where you've got companies who haven't gone to the moon, who are already selling resources on the moon. I feel like we've seen this thing before where people tried to sell plots on Mars and the moon and other things. And in any new area, particularly one that's as exciting as space, there's a lot of snake oil salesmen, and you got to educate yourself if you want to find the real opportunity, because the real opportunity, there's a lot of really fantastic opportunity here, but you got to cut through the noise to get there.
Honestly, I could keep talking to you for hours, and we will continue to do so afterwards, I'm sure, when the recording's finished. But I would like to finish on a positive note. So what is the one thing that really excites you the most that you're looking forward to in the next few years?
Oh boy. It's been a very difficult time in the financial markets. A lot of companies, even great companies, it's been difficult for them to grow and generate revenue. A lot of startup companies have struggled. A lot of funds have struggled. We're in a good place, and our portfolio is doing incredibly well. Actually, we just had our annual investor conference last week. All of our funds are top 10% performance in the world across venture capital funds, not like space funds, like top 10% of funds in the world, which I think is starting to help make the case. Again, it's becoming undeniable. Diversified revenue streams from commercial enterprise customers and government customers make you counter-cyclical, recession-proof. So I think we're like at this point where we've done a lot of the work the hard work. It's surfing analogy, but we've been paddling out for the past 10 years, and now we've cut a massive wave, and now it's time to ride it. Yeah, the next few years are going to be really great.
Thank you for everything that you've done in terms of that paddling, and I hope it didn't exhaust you too much. I am also looking forward to see that wave that's going to come. And I would recommend to everyone to go and read Chad's book on the space economy, and please use the same terminology because that's also a little bit of a challenge for everyone. Thank you so much, Chad, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the GeoInt conference.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And if you have further questions, reach out to us at radio@SpaceWatch.Global. If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Thorsten Triening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.